We'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we're gonna have some stragglers because I just sent out a reminder email, but that way you'll have full time, and
Thank you.
you may go over today if we have more questions like we did last time, but you guys feel free to step out if you need to get back to stuff. I'm gonna open this up in prayer, and so can I pray for that? Yeah, so Walter just let me know that Tiffany's heart was racing yesterday, and so she's at the ER this morning getting that checked out. Not that we all need to like go rushing after her or anything, but let's just keep her in prayer, and maybe we'll have her watch this recording afterwards on peace, and get ourselves, because we know sometimes there's stuff going on that we don't even know what's going on. So we're gonna start off with prayer. Father, thank you so much for this morning. And Lord, would you just take a breath and still ourselves so that we can hear you. And we thank you, God, for again, for the knowledge and the wisdom that you have given Dr. Edwards and the things that he's being able to share with people. And we also just want to lift up our sister Tiffany this morning. God, we just pray that you would touch her body completely. We pray that, Lord, you would bring her great peace, and that this would be, that you would just heal her, whatever part, Lord, needs to be touched, whether it's a physical thing going on, or if it's rooted in some stress or anxiety. God, we just pray that you would open her eyes to see that and speak to her so she can lay that before you and surrender it, Lord. We thank you for healing our bodies and for making us whole. And we thank you for this morning. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Allison. All right. We'll jump right in where we left off yesterday. Just to refresh your memory, I was trying to convince y'all you're more than your genes. So this agouti mouse, they've been bred with this genetic defect to be fat and yellow. And so that baby on the right is not fat and yellow. It has the same gene though. It has that same agouti gene. But the B vitamins that mama ate prior to conception kept that gene turned off. And this is very, very clear in the literature. You can keep the bad genes turned off. And it requires certain nutrients and certain environmental factors, epigenetic factors, to turn the good ones on. And it turns out that that's the vast majority of all these genetic things. It's completely epigenetic. It's all environmental, nutritional, pH, oxygen levels, toxin levels, and thoughts. So today we're going to dive into this a little bit. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You know, y'all probably read that verse if you read the Bible. If you don't read the Bible, you can read it now and think on that. You know, how is that? How could that be true? You know, so much of the Bible, we know it's a book of truth, but then we read stuff and it's like, I mean, you can kind of maybe think it's true, but, and I'm not here to say you have to prove all scripture, but it's really cool when God reveals to the scientist of how this actually is true. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Epigenetics above the genes. There's 25,000 human genes. We didn't know that in the late 90s, early 2000s is when we figured this out. Fruit flies had 15,000. We knew that. Earthworms, 24,000. Mice, about 25,000. And those are such lowly creatures that we estimated humans would have like 100,000 or 200,000 genes, but we didn't know. So we went and pulled a bunch of blood from some young, healthy people, and we were able to count the genes. And the thought back then was that the Human Genome Project would cure everything. We'd figure out all these genes, we'd figure out the genetic cause of every disease, and then we could fix it somehow. It didn't turn out to be that way. But that estimation of 100,000 genes or more was way off. It turned out to be only 25,000 genes. In fact, 90% of the DNA that they found in those samples weren't even human genes. We are full of bug genes, bacteria, virus, parasite, all these different critters. And it turns out the critters actually interact with and talk to our systems. It's an interactive system. Their genetic material influences and talks to our systems, mainly our immune system and our neurological system. So Dean Ornish, he's an MD, medical doctor, I believe UCLA, somewhere in California. He did a big study on prostate cancer. He biopsied the prostate of these patients with prostate cancer, got the cancer cells, looked at the genetics, and there's a certain cancer grow gene that was turned on, a cancer suppressor gene that was turned off. They have a much longer scientific name, but that's what I call them. Cancer grow gene, cancer suppressor gene. Cancer grow was turned off, grow was turned on, suppressor was turned off. He put him through 6 months of diet and stress management, went back, did another biopsy. The cancer suppressor gene had flipped on, and the cancer grow gene had turned off with diet and stress management. And other doctors have repeated his studies. Vitamin D3, it's a hormone, not a vitamin. We know it interacts with 3,000 of those 25,000 genes. If you don't have a good hormone D hooking into its receptor, then you don't get good expression or reading of those genes. And most of those genes have to do with your immune system. So if your vitamin D levels are low, your immune system function will be low too, leaving you prone to cancer. Immune systems are what detects and kills cancer cells. So Bruce Lipton came along in the 60s. So Watson and Crick figured out the DNA thing, the double helix, you remember back in school? That was in the mid-50s. And then in the 60s, Bruce Lipton was a up-and-coming scientist. And what he did was amazing. He took these embryonic stem cells. So a stem cell is basically a baby cell that has all the genetic information, but it can grow into anything. It can grow into an eyeball, it can grow into your toenail, it can grow into a heart, it can grow into whatever. And a stem cell is the baby cell that can grow into anything. So he took stem cells, exact same stem cells. So you take one, it divides into 2, then 4, then 8. So he got them early and he put them into 3 different Petri dishes. So it was the same cell line, same genetics, but each Petri dish, he changed the environment. So on one, he changed the temperature. And the other one, he changed the pH of the culture medium. The other one, he changed the oxygen level. And he let them grow. Same gene, or same cells. The first Petri dish turned into skin, second one into bone, third one into, I think, muscle. So all from the same cell, but they grew into different things based off solely a change in an external influence. That was in the 60s he figured this out. So now, and I interviewed him last year, you can go listen to that on our archives on the radio show, but where his research ended up going over the decades was to thoughts. I mean, we can kind of get our mind around how maybe oxygen and pH and a toxin or a vitamin or something could click into a receptor and that could change the genetic expression, but how could a thought do that? And that's what the book's about, Biology of Belief, and that's what the radio show's about. But his main point is all of this cellular behavior is driven by external things. And then Carolyn Leaf came along, and she's a PhD, also neuropsychologist and a believer. So she overlays scripture. Lipton was, I believe, an atheist or agnostic initially, but through this research came to be a believer because it's just so clear when you get into the quantum. But this is what Carolyn Leaf said in her book: "For now, rest in the assurance that what God has empowered you to do with your mind is more powerful and effective than any medicine, threat, sickness, neurological challenge. The mind is more powerful than anything." And the mind is your thoughts. The mind's not a physical structure. That's your brain. But your mind's outside your brain. And your mind actually drives your brain, which is what she talks about in her book. The mind, which is your thoughts, controls the body, and the brain's part of your body. Your thoughts drive brain function. We used to think that the brain was just this static, non-changing organ, and now we know neuroplasticity. The brain's changing all the time, mostly under the influence of your thought. So she talks about in her book, and the research is showing how thinking, a thought, will, when that double helix Watson and Crick figured out, it's got to unwind and make a photocopy and then wind back up. When it unwinds and makes that photocopy, it does it in a certain way, and the thoughts that you have will impact the way that that DNA unwinds or unzips to make that copy. And what they showed, the third bullet point, anger, fear, and frustration cause that DNA to tighten up, that double helix to tighten up and not unwind appropriately. And it switched off many of the beneficial DNA codes. just from those kind of thoughts. But then look at the next line. This was totally reversed by feelings of love, joy, appreciation, and gratitude. Your DNA double helix tightens or untightens based on those thoughts. So even Harvard Medical School, the Mind Body Institute said 75 to 98% of all disease, that's mental, physical, behavioral, comes from one's thought life. Pretty powerful stuff. There's a study on HIV positive patients. The ones that had a more positive thought process were 300,000 times more resistant. I talked about that yesterday, being resistant to or having a resiliency factor, if you want to think of it that way. I mean, we're bombarded with toxins and nutrient deficient foods and Wi-Fi and all this stuff, but you can build up resiliency against that. And the best way to do it is with your thinking. Also, a study that showed, so if you're not going to think positive for your own health, do it for your kids and grandkids. The sperm and the egg cells will carry these thoughts and these memories of these thoughts with them. It will impact the genes. So if you think about you were conceived, but the egg that became you, that egg was in your mama, but that egg was formed in your mama when mama was in your grandma's womb. Because a woman's eggs are made when you're made as a fetus. Men make sperm all the time. It's a reoccurring production, but the eggs are made pre-delivery, before the baby's born. So the thought of a grandmother can tighten or untighten that DNA, affect the genes of that egg that became you. Reminds me of the verse in Exodus. Here's the study. This was Time Magazine 2010. I mean, this stuff's been out for a good while. Bruce Lipton's book is like 15 years old now, but no one's really talking about this. And I think probably because there's not a pill that can fix your thoughts. Unfortunately, what I've come to learn, this is going to sound really jaded, but if it's not patentable, then I didn't learn it in med school. I hate to say it, but looking back, it's true. So, a little further. Now, most of us get the whole stress reaction. You know, we can't control circumstances. We get a phone call, we get a letter, we get whatever, our kids are doing something, or our parents, or coworker, or just the world. You turn on the news. So circumstances are always going to be there, but your reaction to that circumstance, that's what you're in control of. So Bruce Lipton, the book I showed earlier, Biology of Belief, he did this experiment, Miss Jones and Miss Smith. He put these folks in the same environment of stress. So the external stressors were the exact same. Miss Jones flips into fight or flight mode and stayed in it all day. Miss Smith flipped into fight or flight mode, but in 10 minutes she flipped back into rest and digest or peace mode. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Sympathetic stress, fight or flight. Parasympathetic is peaceful. So he thought from that moment, wow, the external stressors were the same. Remember, Lipton's the external guy. You know, let's change the oxygen and the pH and the temperature and the external factors. So he put these external stressors on, but the response was different. So that was his first clue to, it's not just the stressors in our life. It's our thoughts, how we interpret these stressors and taking captive those thoughts. So that led him on to doing some great things in the thought world. But we're going to talk about how if you overlay scripture there, this is a very powerful concept. I already mentioned this, the brain's changing moment by moment, and it's your thoughts that influence the most. And I'm not saying toxins don't influence the brain. I mean, it's clear toxins do. Glyphosate and aluminum combined together and totally screw up your brain. And those are both in vaccines, aluminum and glyphosate, which is Roundup. So toxins do. Lack of nutrition does. Lack of oxygen obviously does. Trauma, these football players with concussions. There's other things that affect the brain, obviously. I'm not saying it's only thoughts, but thoughts are probably the most powerful. You know, this autonomic nervous system, I mentioned parasympathetic, sympathetic, fight or flight mode, stress mode, that's sympathetic. your autonomic nervous system, this is important to understand because it's your automatic, it's your autopilot. The autonomic nervous system is controlling all those things in your body right now that you have to have going on. Your heart is beating. You're not telling your heart to beat. Your autonomic nervous system is. You're breathing. You don't have to think about make yourself breathe. There's your digestion. If you ate breakfast this morning, you're digesting that food right now. You're not voluntarily making that happen. So these are autopilot things. It's called the autonomic nervous system, and it can only run in one of two modes. And it's those up there on the screen, sympathetic or parasympathetic. That's it. You're in one or the other. And it is good to go back and forth to a degree, but we're not meant to be sympathetic dominant all day long or most hours of the day, every day of the week. I mean, think of it way back in the day when things weren't so stressful. You're just living your life, doing your thing, and a mountain lion comes across your trail and you go into fight or flight mode for 5 minutes to kill that lion or run away from him or you died. So in 5 minutes, your fight or flight's done. You're back to parasympathetic, and you're in parasympathetic for weeks, months, whatever. Originally in the garden, before the fall, parasympathetic dominated everything. But we tend to all be sympathetic now. We get flipped into sympathetic easily. And I talked about that yesterday. That's your flexor muscles. Everything tenses up because you're ready to fight or run. And that shifts the pH in the blood, which causes a whole downstream effect. So that's one part of this whole lack of peace. It's the physical fight or flight mode, sympathetic dominance. When you're sympathetic dominant, you're trying to kill the mountain lion. Your body will shut down the systems that it doesn't need to kill the mountain lion. So it doesn't need to digest food in that 5 minutes you're trying to save your life. So it shuts down the digestive processes. So if you're in fight or flight mode all the time, your stomach acid gets compromised. Your stomach acid pumps, 50% of them turn off. If you don't have stomach acid, you can't break the food down. You can't absorb B12, B6, calcium, magnesium, iron. All the minerals and vitamins are dependent upon a very acidic pH. Your peristalsis, that's the movement of the food going down, that gets compromised. Gallbladder and pancreatic function gets compromised when you're in fight or flight all the time. So digestive system turns down. Immune system function turns down. You don't need an immune system in the 5 minutes you're trying to kill the mountain lion. 50% of your white blood cell production goes down when you're in fight or flight mode. Your hormone system, thyroid. A lot of thyroid patients come to our clinic. They have a low thyroid symptom profile. The thyroid gets shut down when you're in fight or flight mode. You don't need a real active hormone system when you're trying to kill a mountain lion. But these systems, hormone, digestive, and immune, those are your main systems that keep you healthy forever. That's your maintaining of health systems. So if you're in fight or flight all the time, your main maintenance systems are offline. So that's one piece of it. Just your physical systems aren't going to work well. I'm going to come back to these guys because I want to make sure I have time. Okay. So the physical systems are one thing, but what we're going to talk about, this is Dr. Emoto in Japan. Dr. Emoto, I don't remember how he got here to doing this experiment, but basically what he did was look at water molecules under a microscope. And these water molecules changed shape dependent upon external forces. And I didn't put all the slides in, but you can Google him or get his book and look at it. I mean, there's pictures of fresh spring water coming out of the ground up in a pristine mountain range. And it's beautiful water molecules, kind of like that top one. And then he took water from a real polluted river that goes through all the main cities of China and gets real polluted. And it was just an ugly, kind of like the bottom water molecule. So those are two pictures of water molecules. So from pollution, but then he took it a step further. This is going to sound crazy, maybe not. It did to me when I first heard it. But when they spoke words to the water, it changed the shape of the water. So you can get in his book or go on the website and find when I hate you or any negative word versus love and appreciation and joyful words. it changed the shape of the water molecules. It was crazy. But now take that concept into the cell. The cell membrane is a bilipid layer. Lipids are fats. In the cell membrane is where your keyholes are. These are receptors, different shaped keyholes for all your hormones, testosterone, thyroid, insulin, vitamin D. They come along and click in, say vitamin D. Then when that connection happens at the cell membrane, remember Bruce Lipton said the cell membrane is where all the action is, then that is what sends a signal to your DNA to do something, to unwind and read this gene, turn that gene off, whatever. So that's where all these click in. I think we talked about last time I came here, not yesterday, but the last time, the mitochondria, the carburetor, makes all your energy, ATP. I don't know if I told you though, it also, it makes exhaust. We call them free radicals. Free radicals can damage your cell membrane, can damage the DNA. Antioxidant enzymes will take care of those. But another thing you make is water, but it's not H2O, it's H3O2. This is called structured water, or the fourth phase of water. You know, liquid, solid, and gas, the water vapor. We've always known there's three phases of water, but Dr. Gerald Pollack, University of Washington, figured out there's a fourth phase. And he figured this out one day, this is about 20 years ago. He was doing an experiment on a cardiac muscle cell under the microscope. He was doing some things with a pipette. A pipette's a little glass straw, but he accidentally he was too aggressive. He punched a hole in the cell membrane. But the cell maintained its structure. The water didn't just squirt out like he thought it would have, like a water balloon if you punctured a water balloon. And so I thought, well, that's weird. He punched another hole and another hole and another hole, and the cells stayed intact. So he started thinking, what in the world is this water inside the cell? And we're 99% water, guys. The water inside the cell, it turned out to be this H3O2. He called it the fourth phase of water. Now we call it structured water. There's some other names for it. But the water molecule, the H2O molecule, lines up with the other water molecules in a very orderly manner, and then the electrons start to share in a manner that totally changes the water molecule to H3O2. And in its fully structured state, it's more of a gel-like substance, kind of like Jell-O. And this is what's so cool. This H3O2, not only does it have a charge to it, so this cell membrane has to be charged. You have to have more positives and negatives. You have to have them separated, kind of like a battery. Opposite charges separated by a structure, a cell membrane. This cell has to be energized. If that cell loses its charge, it dies. And then enough cells die, you die. The charge is coming from the water, the structured water. This water will destructure and turn back to H2O, lose its charge and lose its structure under various influences like toxins, lack of exercise, low oxygen states, but thoughts, negative thoughts, will destructure the water inside your cell. And that cell will lose its energetics. And it won't function right. A cell that doesn't have enough energy and enough charge to it won't function right. So before it actually dies, if it's just losing voltage, losing charge, it can't. So your immune system cell, this is every cell in your body, a brain cell, a hamstring cell, a eyeball cell, an immune system cell. If it starts to lose charge, it won't function right, and you'll have a slow degenerative effect. And that's why these thoughts can be so, so powerful, because you can immediately restructure that water based off your thought. And we already talked about what a thought does to the genes and the ability to read or not read and unwind the DNA just right. But the structuring of the water, I think, is the most powerful thing. And that's what these two guys and gals, Dr. Lorraine Day, she was an orthopedic trauma surgeon, head of the department, UC San Francisco, I believe. It's back in the 80s. She found a lump in her breast. She went to her surgery buddies there in the hospital. They cut it out. It was cancerous. She elected to not do the chemo and radiation following the lumpectomy. And so it was a few years later it came back, and it was spreading. She refused the chemo and radiation just because she felt like the side effects and the negative impact on her quality of life and all that. So she looked at some alternative things to do and went to Mexico and did like 40 different alternative therapies. None of them worked. And the cancer spread and got worse and worse and worse. And basically she was on her deathbed on hospice, laying in her bed at home about to die. And she was, as she describes it, she was kind of talking to God, crying out to God one night. And she felt like God revealed to her she had unforgiveness in her heart about something. I don't know the details of that. And she dealt with that unforgiveness. And the next day she woke up, she was still alive. She didn't die in the night. And the next day after that, she felt a little better. And the next day after that, she had a little more energy. And the next day after that, she just slowly felt better. And then the mass started shrinking. And over time, the mass went totally away. And her cancer went totally away. And this would be called a spontaneous remission. In the conventional medical literature, there's known cases of spontaneous remission of cancer. So that's what she had, a spontaneous remission. Of course, she would tell you it's because of that unforgiveness was dealt with. That was one example, and there are many. Dr. Hammer, he's in Germany. Dr. Hammer was a strapping, young, healthy, athletic surgeon, trauma surgeon in Germany. Never sick a day in his life. He gets called to the ER for a emergency trauma surgery. A gunshot wound victim was coming in. They worked him, and the patient ended up dying. It was his own son. It was like 3 months later, Dr. Hammer, got testicular cancer. So he just had this thought, this has to be related to this emotional trauma I just went through because I've been healthy my whole life and I'm athletic and I take care of myself and whatever. So he went on to study all the patients in the hospital that had cancer. He went and visited them in their rooms and interviewed them and asked them about emotional traumas. And over time, as he studied this more and more, he also studied their CAT scans. And what he started to correlate were these spots in the brain. The radiologist had been calling them artifact. When you do a scan on a patient, if they kind of move a little bit, or if just the scan, if there's a little mishap during the scan, there'll be a little gray spot that, just looks fuzzy. Radiologists call it artifact. But what Hammer saw was this very distinct, he calls it a halo. Now we call it a halo, Hammer halo spot. It's just this little ring in different parts of the brain on the CAT scan. And he started to, this is over lots of cases and I think many years, correlate the different cancers to the different spots of the brain, and then the emotions like anger, grief, unforgiveness, bitterness. He would associate the different emotions with the different organs, and the halo spots would associate with that part of the brain. I mean, it was nuts. He ended up seeing lots of patients with cancer and had 90% remission rates just dealing with the unresolved emotion. And the German authorities didn't really like that and took him to court. And for the first time in German law history, I haven't looked this up, this is what my mentor, Dr. Lee Cowden, told me, so I haven't verified this, but he told me the first time in German law history, the defense witness for Dr. Hammer called the prosecutor to the stand to testify on behalf of the defense, and he asked the prosecutor, out of those 6,000 charts y'all went through and called all the family members and patients, how many were still alive? And that's where they got the 90+% number. It's called New German Medicine. It's totally based off thoughts. So some verses to consider. There's lots of them. And I won't go through all of them, but you might write some of these down and consider them. I would really encourage you to get Dr. Leaf's book, Switch on Your Brain. Because my own personal interpretation of all of this would be, before you were in your mama's womb, God knew you. And he has a great work plan for you, for each of us. He knew us. He had some work plan for each of us. There's a gifting he put in each one of us. And somewhere else in Scripture, it says that call that he put on your life is without recall. It can't be recalled. It can't be taken out of you. Before you were in your womb, he knew who you're supposed to be and what he made you to be. And he put this thing in your heart, and that's what you're supposed to do. So this is a bullseye. Again, this is my personal kind of interpretation on all this. So that bullseye is exactly the thing that you're supposed to do. That's the call he put on your life. That's without recall. I think Satan's whole purpose is for us to be off that bullseye a little bit or a lot or way off or way out here. So how does he get us off from doing the thing we're supposed to do? Thoughts. The father of all lies will put a thought out there, and here's where the rubber meets the road. Are we going to agree with that thought or not agree with that thought? And if you agree with that thought, then you're off. And in archery terms, that is that measurement of how far off the bullseye is called sin. I think maybe S-Y-N, but I'll call it S-I-N. I mean, just like when if someone breaks in and steals your purse, ladies, you would think, well, that was a sinful thing, that being a thief or robbing me, stealing. But really, the stealing wasn't the sin. That was the fruit that was produced from a thought, and the thought was, God's not going to provide for me. I got to go take from my sister, my brother. It all starts with a thought that's not lined up with the truth. Of course, God's going to provide for us. He owns it all. But we have a thought that's not lined up with the truth. That's sin. Then there's fruit that comes out of that sin. And we can spend all day trying to do good works and not be a thief and not do this and that or the other. But really, we got to get deeper to our thoughts. And the thoughts will impact all this cellular stuff. It's all about the thoughts. So, the bullseye is the truth. And I know we live in a world where, well, anyone's truth is, your truth. You can have your truth, I'll have my truth, and we're not supposed to offend anybody, but come on. We know there can't be two truths. There's one truth, and I'm not here to say I know it all. Of course, I don't know it all. Nobody, Jesus knew it all. But we got to line everything up, especially fear. Fear is a huge one, and fear-mongering is what the world is using to drive us in everything, from measles to you name it, monetary stuff, whatever. Just fear, fear, fear. I don't think it's up on any of these, but it says, I didn't give you a spirit of fear. If it's not coming from God, that goes back to that Ephesians verse. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, authorities, and powers of this dark world. That's where these thoughts are coming from, these rulers and authorities, but they have no authority in your life if you're a believer, unless you give them authority, because all authority was given to Jesus. So how do these guys have authority? Well, we give it to them when we agree. When we say, yeah, I'm going to be afraid of that. I'm going to fear cancer. I'm going to fear whatever. Dr. Lorraine Day, the orthopedic trauma surgeon that had breast cancer, one of her books or DVDs, the title of it is Cancer Doesn't Scare Me Anymore. Because she totally gets all this now. And so it's not just cancer. We're not supposed to fear anything. All things work for the good of those who love him. So even though this thing looks bad, and by the world standards would be bad, it's not bad, because all things, all is all. But this is where we really have to believe what it says. And this is for me too. I mean, I thought I believed a lot of this stuff. I've been in church my whole life. But when the circumstances in my world got real tight, real hard, then it got to be, wait a minute, do I really believe this or do I not? I mean, my thoughts were going off everywhere. And what Dr. Leaf is so great about is she helps you identify these thoughts that get set up in you as a kid. And they become really, your identity gets intertwined with these thoughts that aren't true. And you got to go back there and identify that and bring the truth to it. I'll give you an example. Both my granddads were the town doctors in the little town I grew up in, and they did everything, took care of the whole family from baby to nursing home, and did surgeries, did everything. And the town loved them. And I mean, they were great guys. They were pillars in the community, deacons, school board, you name it. So great family to be raised in, and a great community and all that. But somewhere in there, a thought got introduced into my head that for me to be fully loved, accepted, worthy as a doctor, I had to be like my granddad's. I had to do it all. I had to be small town, deliver babies, do surgeries, be on every civic thing, do it all. Be like them. Now, they never told me that. My parents never told me that. No one in the community told me that. But that thought came in, and it wasn't true. But it drove me to live and act and talk and interact with people, including my wife, in a certain way that triggered some fight or flight, but also just triggered life, the relational stuff that just wasn't based in the truth. So that was a thought. I had to go down there and identify that and then bring the truth to it. So it's not like these are bad things. I wasn't being a thief or doing sinful stuff, but I wasn't hitting the bullseye because a thought got introduced to me that I believed that wasn't the truth. So I encourage y'all to really go back and consider these things and read those books and dive deeper into your own personal walk and back to childhood even. Some of these you have to go to the third and fourth generation and think about these things to be truly set free and to be truly well. Now, we're never going to hit the bullseye perfect every time, obviously. But when Satan came to Jesus with those three lies, those three thoughts or lies that weren't truth, Jesus combated them with the truth. He answered them with the truth. So that's where we got to go and figure out when I feel like I'm not, my barometer now is tending versus toiling. If you feel like you're toiling all the time versus tending, I mean, you can be busy, you can be working even long days if you're supposed to, if that's what you're called to do. You can have a full life, you can have lots of things going on, but at the end of the day, you should lay your head down and feel like, you weren't toiling all day. You were tending to a lot of good things, a lot of things you're supposed to do. So if I get to where I'm toiling a little or a lot for sure, then I'm pause and I'm asking, wait a minute, am I doing what God's called me to do? Down in Post, I was doing the nursing home, the county jail, the juvenile detention center, the house calls, Friday night football games, just the clinic, a lot of stuff. And it was all good stuff. But did God call me to all those things? Or was I doing that to people please and to try to have my own self-worth built up and self-esteem and blah, blah, blah. So it's tricky. It can be tricky. It doesn't have to be tricky if you line your thoughts up with the truth. But sometimes when you identify that truth and you know you're doing something that's creating the toiling, I mean, you gotta deal with it. You don't gotta, but toiling is going to lead to consequences that aren't good. Not only are you going to miss being who God made you to be, but physical disease could also come. So stay out of fight or flight and stay out of toiling mode, but you can't just do that by let's take a vacation. Let's cut my work hours down. Let's say no to one or two things or whatever. You got to really address the root of why are you doing these things? Why is it the fruit of producing toiling? And usually it's going to be a thought that's not true. So you got to know who you are, your identity, who God made you to be, what blind spots do you have where Satan can easily lie to you, and you pick that lie up and bring the truth to it. And usually it takes someone outside of you to help you see that. Iron sharpens iron. Find your Barnabas and vomit it all out, or someone who's spiritually mature enough to walk through these things with you and do it. Or don't. And be off and toil and fight or flight and destructure your water and shut your digestive hormone immune system down and be a standard American and slowly degenerate. So here is the life expectancy. I think now it's 77 and a half or something. It's been going down every year. But all our days are numbered. God knows the number of your days. I can't change it. MD Anderson can't change it. Nobody can change it. That day is set. But the health span curve is what we should be concerned about. You should be healthy, vibrant, active, mentally and physically till your spirit's called home, your flesh falls over dead. Your standard American their health curve starts to deteriorate about 20 or 30 years old. We used to say at 40 you hit the downhill, but now it's younger. And by the time you're 50 and 60, I showed the slides yesterday, all the drugs 60-year-old people are on, or even young people are on. It's this health span curve that is so deteriorating in America. And if you're too busy being fatigued and in pain and indigestion and going to the doctor all the time, and it's going to be hard to hit the bullseye when you're too busy being sick and your brain's not even working right, much less your body. So the goal is to get the health span curve extended out to match your lifespan curve. And I think that was God's original intent. Why would he number your days in the physical and not give you a body to correspondingly work for you and a mind to work for you those many days? He didn't design us so poorly that we're just slowly deteriorating with low energy and brain fog and disease and cancer and diabetes and all this stuff. It's the external influences. So go be a non-standard American. Don't be a standard American statistic. Be a light, stand out, be different. People look at you and say, they're different. What is it? And it's not just how you dress. It's not just your external. I mean, it's good to be polite and nice and open doors for people, but something deeper in you. And I think y'all are as a group already a long way down that road, but keep going. All of us have to keep going. Me too. Satan's a sneaky lion on the prowl. I don't think I have that verse up there, but he knows your blind spots. He will repackage that lie and represent it to you. See if you'll pick it back up. He does it to me all the time. I'm getting better at recognizing, oop, that's a people pleasing. I'm about to make a decision based off people pleasing. I can't do that. So happy to answer questions. There's a whole lot more. If you're interested in any of this, even a little bit, I highly recommend Bruce Lipton and Carolyn Leaf's books. Bruce Lipton I've interviewed, and it's one of my favorite ones. Carolyn Leaf, I'm trying to get her on the show, but her book's great too. And she's got online curriculum too. If you want to work through she does a 21-day brain detox, and it's not a physical detox like take supplements. It's all about thoughts. Detox these thoughts that you've had since you were 6 years old when your dad said there's no way you're going to amount to anything or whatever. It's a really good curriculum. So check that out. She also has one on identity that I would recommend. Okay, how's that for some uplifting, fun stuff to start your Friday?